Ben Carter's breath came in short, painful bursts, each exhale sending a fresh wave of agony through his battered body. His military uniform, once sleek and well-maintained, was now a patchwork of blood-soaked fabric and scorched armor plates. The sharp, searing pain from the gash along his side had begun to blur his vision, leaving dark spots that danced at the edges of his sight. He could feel his strength draining away with every step, his legs heavy and uncooperative. The alien forest around him was eerily silent, the usual hum of strange wildlife stilled in the wake of the raiders' attack. He had been part of a medical aid mission, sent to a remote settlement to assist with the villagers' health and well-being. But what was meant to be a peaceful mission had quickly turned into a nightmare. The raiders had attacked without warning, and Ben had stayed behind to drag a wounded villager out of the crossfire. It had been a moment's hesitation, just long enough to get hit, and now he was paying the price. The plasma fire from the raiders' weapons still rang in his ears, distant and angry, like an echo of the violence that had unfolded. He had no idea if his team had made it out, or if they were even alive. His radio had been destroyed in the firefight, and now there was nothing but the harsh reality of his own survival. He staggered, his weakened body giving out beneath him. His knees buckled, and he fell to the ground, coughing up blood as his fingers dug into the cold, alien soil beneath him. The world tilted, the edges of his vision growing darker as the sounds of the battle seemed to fade away. Then a flicker of light caught his eye, a faint glow deep within the forest where the trees parted and the rocky earth seemed to beckon. It was a pool of water, shining faintly in the gloom, its surface glistening like liquid gold. "Water," Ben muttered to himself, dragging his injured body toward the glowing light. It seemed like the only hope he had left, his mind focused solely on the promise of relief. He knew it wasn't safe to stop, not with the raiders still out there hunting the survivors. But his body was no longer obeying him, and the thirst in his throat was unbearable. With every ounce of strength he had left, Ben crawled toward the pool, his hands leaving bloody smears across the rough stone floor. He reached the edge, his hand shaking as he plunged it into the cool, shimmering liquid. He brought his hand to his lips, gulping down the water in desperate, greedy swallows. The first taste was strange, metallic, bitter, but it quenched his thirst. He took another gulp, feeling the icy water flood his parched throat. Almost immediately, he felt something shift inside him. The pain in his side, the aching throb that had been there since the raiders' attack, began to dull. His breath, once ragged and shallow, grew easier. His pulse slowed, and the darkness at the edge of his vision seemed to recede. Ben blinked in disbelief as he looked down at his side. The gash was still there, but it no longer burned. In fact, it seemed to be healing before his eyes. The torn flesh began to close, stitching itself together as though some unseen force was mending him from the inside out. His body, which had been on the brink of collapse moments before, now felt strong again, the life returning to him in a way that felt almost unnatural. He leaned back, his head spinning as he tried to process what was happening. The water, it was healing him. But how? A voice, cold and emotionless, cut through the silence. "You drank from the source." Ben's heart skipped a beat. He whipped around, his hand instinctively reaching for the sidearm he'd lost somewhere in the chaos of his flight. But there was nothing but the cool stone beneath his fingers. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, with blue skin that shimmered in the dim light of the cave, eyes glowing a soft purple in the darkness. The woman stood still, her posture regal and unyielding, a jagged blade in her hand, its edge gleaming with an unnatural light. "Who are you?" Ben demanded, his voice hoarse, struggling to hold onto some semblance of control. The woman's eyes narrowed, studying him with an intensity that sent a chill down Ben's spine. "I am Mira of the Mountain People, and you human have broken the law." Ben's brow furrowed. "I don't even know what you're talking about, I just needed water." Mira's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "The source gives life," she said, her voice cold as tempered steel. "But it takes as well, always. You are now a debtor. The mountain never gives freely." Ben struggled to his feet, his mind racing. "I don't owe anyone anything. I'm just trying to survive." Mira's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Then you will serve the source, or you will die by its hand." Ben's heart raced as he stumbled backward, suddenly aware of how vulnerable he was. "Serve the source? What are you talking about?" The woman stepped forward, her movements fluid and predatory, her blade never wavering in her hand. "You are healed because of the source, but you must pay for its gift. Your life is now bound to it, as mine is and all who live here. You must give your blood, your soul, or you will suffer the consequences. Ben felt the weight of her words settle over him like a heavy fog. He'd come here to help, to make a difference, but now he was trapped in a system that seemed as alien as the planet itself. The source, this strange and mysterious power, had healed him, but at what cost? What did it want from him in return? Before he could respond, Mira's gaze softened ever so slightly, a flicker of something almost human in her eyes. Come with me. The elders will decide your fate. Ben hesitated, his thoughts swirling. He was weak, alone, and caught in something far beyond his understanding. But he couldn't turn back now. The pain in his body had faded, but the fear and confusion were just beginning to settle in. He had no choice but to follow her. The air was thick with tension as Mira led Ben through the narrow, winding paths of the village. The stone buildings, crude but sturdy, seemed to grow directly from the rocky landscape itself, their surfaces etched with strange symbols and markings. The village was small but well organized, with channels for water running through the streets and signs of clever engineering in the way the homes were constructed, signs of a people who had adapted to their harsh environment with ingenuity and determination. But there was no mistaking the exhaustion in the villagers' eyes, the weight of survival pressing down on them. Ben could see it in their faces as they watched him pass, their gazes filled with suspicion, curiosity, and something else, something darker. He was the outsider, the human, the one who had drunk from the source without understanding its true cost. Mira's movements were precise and deliberate as she led him toward a large stone structure at the center of the village. It looked like a communal hall of some sort, but there was an oppressive air to it, as if the weight of countless decisions had been made within its walls. The elders were inside, Ben realized, and they would decide his fate. Mira paused at the entrance, turning to Ben with a final, unreadable glance. "Stay silent," she commanded, her voice sharp. "The elders will speak. You will listen." Ben nodded, his throat dry. He had no intention of speaking, not yet. He was still processing what had happened, how the source had healed him so quickly, how it had given him life when it should have taken it. But Mira's words about debts and sacrifice haunted him. He wasn't sure what kind of game he was caught in, but he knew he had no choice but to play along. Inside the hall, the air was dim and heavy, filled with the scent of incense and the faint echo of whispered conversations. The elders, draped in ceremonial robes, sat in a circle on stone platforms, their eyes glowing softly in the low light. There was no mistaking the power that radiated from them. They were the keepers of the source, the ones who understood its mysteries, its dangers. Ben's eyes were drawn to the figure sitting at the center of the circle, a tall, imposing man with blue skin and white hair. His eyes, however, were not glowing like the others. They were dull, sunken with age, his once strong frame now frail and weak. This was the chieftain, Mira's father. The source had healed him, but at what cost? Ben couldn't help but wonder. As Mira stepped forward, the elders fell silent, their attention fixed on her. She bowed slightly, a gesture of respect, before turning to Ben. "This is the human who drank from the source," she said, her voice steady but tinged with something else, something like resignation. The chieftain's gaze shifted to Ben, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in the human before him. "You are healed," he said, his voice raspy but commanding. "But you are also bound. The source demands a price." Ben met the chieftain's gaze without flinching. "I didn't ask for this," he said, his voice strained but firm. "I just needed water." The chieftain's lips curled into a faint smile, though it was one that lacked any warmth. "The source does not give freely. It never has." He paused, his gaze flicking toward Mira before returning to Ben. "Your debt is now ours to decide." Ben's heart raced as the weight of the chieftain's words sank in. He had assumed that, as a medic, his presence here would be seen as a gift, a blessing to help these people. But now it seemed he was nothing more than a pawn in some ancient ritual, a debt he hadn't asked for but had been forced to accept. One of the elders, a woman with silver hair and sharp, calculating eyes, spoke up. "The source does not discriminate. It heals, yes, but only in exchange for life. That is the law. If you have been given life, you must give something in return." Ben's jaw tightened, and he took a step forward, his voice rising with frustration. "I'm a medic. I help people. I don't deal in sacrifices. I don't believe in taking lives for healing." Another elder, a man with deep scars etched into his blue skin, leaned forward. "You speak of healing without cost, but here there is no such thing. The balance must be maintained. Life for life, death for death. It is the way of our people." Ben's fists clenched at his sides. "That's barbaric." Mira stepped forward, her eyes locking with his. "You have no understanding of our world, human," she said softly, though there was no warmth in her words. "You speak of compassion, of healing, but you do not see the price we pay to survive. This is the law of the source. If you wish to stay here, you must abide by it." The chieftain's eyes softened, and he looked at Ben with something approaching pity. "We did not ask for this either, but the source is not a gift, it is a bond. It binds us all, and if you wish to live, you will find your place within it." Ben felt a knot form in his stomach. He had wanted to help these people, but now it seemed that no matter what he did, he would be trapped. The source had healed him, yes, but it had come at a cost, and that cost was more than just his life. It was a piece of his soul, a piece of his humanity that he would have to give in order to survive here. The chieftain's voice was low but firm as he addressed the room. "The decision is made. The human will serve the source, as we all must." Ben's mind raced, his thoughts spinning as the elders murmured in agreement. He couldn't believe this was happening. He had come here to help, to heal, but now it seemed he was being forced into something far darker. The weight of the source's power was crushing him, and he didn't know how to escape it. Mira's eyes met his one last time, her expression unreadable. She nodded to him, a silent acknowledgement of the decision. And just like that, Ben's fate was sealed. The ground trembled beneath Ben's feet, the sensation unfamiliar and unsettling, like the heartbeat of the planet itself pulsing beneath the surface. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, the deep primal shift that seemed to resonate throughout the village. The elders, still murmuring among themselves, fell silent at the sudden quake, their gazes flicking to the stone ceiling above. Ben's hand instinctively went to his side, where the gash had healed so unnaturally quickly, a pale scar now visible through his torn uniform. His mind was still racing, trying to process what was happening, what he had just agreed to. He hadn't come here to get wrapped up in some ancient ritual. He hadn't asked for this debt, yet somehow it was already part of him. Mira stepped forward, her blue skin shimmering in the dim light of the hall, her posture rigid. "The source is restless," she said, her voice low but urgent. "It reacts when the balance is threatened." "What do you mean?" Ben asked, his voice tight with frustration. "What's happening?" Mira's eyes were cold, calculating. "The raiders are returning." Ben's heart skipped a beat. He had barely escaped them once, and now they were coming back for more. The thought of facing them again, especially in his weakened state, sent a wave of dread through him. He couldn't risk getting caught up in their violence, not when there was so much at stake. The chieftain's voice broke through his thoughts. "The raiders are no longer the only threat," he said gravely. "They are the harbingers of something much worse." Ben's gaze shifted back to the chieftain. "Something worse?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "What could be worse than them?" The chieftain's eyes darkened, and he stood with great effort, his frailty becoming evident as he moved. "The mercenaries," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They've found us." "Mercenaries?" Ben's mind raced. "What are you talking about?" Mira's expression tightened. "The raiders are just a distraction. The real danger is coming from the sky." Ben's heart dropped. The mercenaries were a force beyond the raiders' wildest dreams. Hired guns with no loyalty but to the highest bidder, mercenaries had no regard for life or culture. And if they were coming for the source, they would burn the entire village to the ground without a second thought. Ben's hands clenched into fists, his military instincts kicking in. "We need to get ready. We need to evacuate. We can't let them take the source." Mira shook her head, her expression unreadable. "It's too late for that. They already know. The raiders were just the first wave. The mercenaries will be here soon." Ben's pulse quickened as the weight of her words settled over him. He had been so focused on helping, on healing, that he hadn't considered the larger implications of his presence here. The source, whatever it was, had made this planet a target. And now, the worst possible people were coming to take it. The ground beneath them shook again, this time harder, and a low, rumbling sound filled the air like thunder cracking in the distance. The sound grew louder, accompanied by the roar of engines. Ben's heart sank as he realized what it was. The mercenaries had arrived. "Get to the caves," Mira shouted, her voice sharp and commanding. "Now." The villagers, who had been watching the exchange in tense silence, sprang into action. Ben was shoved aside as the elders hurried toward the rear exit, ushering the villagers to safety. Mira moved with purpose, grabbing Ben by the arm and pulling him toward the same exit. Her grip was strong, almost urgent. "What are you doing?" Ben asked, his mind racing. We need to stop them, don't we? We can't just hide. Mira's face was a mask of grim determination. We don't have the numbers or the firepower to face them head-on. We're already outmatched. We need to retreat and regroup. The elders know the caves. They're our safest option. Ben resisted for a moment, instinctively wanting to take action, but he realized she was right. The mercenaries were a force unlike anything the villagers could fight. His heart pounded in his chest as he was pulled into the darkness of the tunnel system beneath the village. The walls of the tunnel were damp and cold, the air thick with the musty scent of earth and stone. As they moved deeper, Ben's mind raced, his thoughts a whirlwind of fear and frustration. He had come here to help these people, to use his skills as a medic, but now it felt like everything was slipping out of his control. They reached a small chamber deeper inside the mountain, and Mira finally let go of his arm. The elders were already gathering, their faces tense, their eyes filled with worry. The sound of distant explosions and gunfire echoed faintly through the tunnels, the mercenaries' assault beginning in earnest. Ben turned to Mira. How long until they reach us? She didn't answer right away, her eyes scanning the group of villagers huddled in the chamber. We don't know, she said quietly. The caves are our only hope. If we stay here, they'll find us. We must stay hidden and we must hold the line. Ben's gaze shifted to the villagers, who were now silent and still, their expressions a mix of fear and resignation. He couldn't help but wonder if they had any idea how dire their situation was. They had lived under the shadow of the source for so long, following its ancient laws, that they hadn't considered what might happen if that power was ever threatened by outsiders. And now the source itself was the key to their survival, or their destruction. The explosion sounded closer this time, followed by the unmistakable roar of a ship's engines overhead. The mercenaries were coming down from the sky, and there was no escape. The mountainside began to rumble again, a tremor stronger than the last, as if the planet itself was trying to shake free of its tormentors. Ben felt a cold chill run down his spine. He knew they didn't have much time. They couldn't outrun the mercenaries, and they couldn't outfight them. The only option left was to try and hold them off. But the real question was, could they? The cave entrance splintered with a deafening crack, dust and debris filling the air. Ben's heart slammed in his chest as the mercenaries poured through the gap, their black-clad figures silhouetted against the burning light outside. The noise of their entry reverberated through the tunnel system, a chaotic clash of metal and rock that sent a wave of panic through the villagers. Mira was already moving, her blade drawn, the edge glinting in the dim light of the cave. Her posture was solid, her movements sharp and purposeful, but even she couldn't hide the uncertainty that flashed across her face. The village had always hidden, always retreated in the face of danger, but this time was different. This time they had no place to hide. Ben's pulse quickened and adrenaline surged through him. The medic in him wanted to help the wounded, to protect the civilians, but his military instincts kicked in as well. This wasn't just about healing. This was about survival. He grabbed a loose rock from the ground, his fingers wrapping around it as a makeshift weapon. The mercenaries weren't expecting resistance, but they were trained to adapt quickly. Ben could see their eyes scanning the room, calculating their next move, weapons raised in anticipation. They weren't here for negotiation. Move, Mira shouted, her voice cutting through the panic. We fight or we die, get ready. Ben nodded, the weight of the situation sinking in. The villagers, some armed with crude weapons or old tools, began to shift nervously into position. A few looked to Mira for guidance, their fear evident in the way they held their makeshift spears and knives. Others, however, were already starting to retreat deeper into the cave system, their instincts telling them to flee. Mira took a step forward, her voice commanding. Stand your ground, we protect the source no matter what. Ben's eyes flicked back to the cave entrance. The mercenaries were closing in, their footsteps echoing ominously. He couldn't let them reach the heart of the cave where the source lay, where its power was the last thread of hope for the villagers. He had no idea what the source truly was or how it worked, but he had learned enough to know that it was the only thing keeping the village from falling into utter chaos. If the mercenaries got their hands on it, they'd destroy everything. The first shot rang out. A mercenary, his face hidden behind a helmet, fired his blaster indiscriminately into the crowd. Ben saw one of the villagers, a young woman with a child clutched in her arms, go down. She crumpled to the ground, blood streaming from her side. The child screamed, but there was no time to react. Ben's body moved before his mind could catch up. He bolted forward, ducking behind a large stone pillar just as a second shot rang out. The blast grazed his arm, sending a jolt of pain through his body, but he didn't stop. His training took over. He knew how to fight. He had done it before. Mira was already in motion, a blur of speed and precision. Her blade flashed, striking down one of the mercenaries with ruthless efficiency. She moved like a force of nature, her every action calculated to kill, to protect. Ben watched, awestruck, as she dispatched another attacker with a single, fluid motion, her footwork flawless. But there were too many of them. The mercenaries were well-armed, well-trained, and they didn't hesitate. The cave began to fill with the sounds of battle, shouting, blaster fire, the heavy thud of bodies hitting the ground. Ben found himself locked in hand-to-hand combat with one of the mercenaries, his rock barely enough to defend himself. The man was bigger, stronger, and faster, but Ben was more agile. He sidestepped a punch, countering with a quick jab to the man's throat. The mercenary staggered back, gasping for air, but Ben couldn't stop to finish him off. There were too many others closing in. The villagers were holding their own, but just barely. A few of the older warriors fought valiantly, using their knowledge of the land to their advantage, but they were outmatched. It wasn't enough. "Fall back," Mira's voice cut through the chaos. "Get to the deeper caves, move." But Ben knew there was no time to retreat. They couldn't afford to let the mercenaries take control of the caves. If they did, they would never get another chance to fight. "We stand and fight," Ben shouted, his voice rising above the noise. He grabbed a nearby spear from one of the fallen villagers, its tip jagged and crude but sharp enough to do the job. "We don't run." Mira turned, her eyes locking with his. There was something in her gaze, something that told him she understood. She nodded once, and with a swift motion, she sent another mercenary crashing to the ground. The battle raged on, but it was clear that the mercenaries were gaining the upper hand. Their weapons were far more advanced, their tactics ruthless. Ben could feel the tide shifting, the villagers' resolve beginning to crack under the pressure. They were losing. "Ben," Mira called, her voice strained. She was standing over the fallen body of a mercenary, but she was breathing heavily, her face bloodied from a deep cut across her cheek. "We can't win this. We need to make sure the source is protected." Ben turned, his eyes scanning the room for the source. It was deeper within the cave, hidden in the inner sanctum, but he knew it wouldn't stay hidden for long. The mercenaries would find it. They always found what they were looking for. Ben's mind raced. There had to be something he could do. He couldn't let them take the source. The villagers needed it. It was their only hope. And if the mercenaries got their hands on it, there would be no stopping them. A sudden, violent explosion rocked the cave, sending a shockwave through the chamber. Ben was thrown off his feet, landing hard against the stone floor. The dust in the air made it hard to see, but the smell of burning metal filled his nostrils. The mercenaries had breached the deeper section of the cave, and the source was within their reach. "Ben, help!" Mira's voice was barely audible through the chaos, but Ben heard it clearly. She was fighting off two mercenaries at once, but she was starting to falter, her movements slowing. Ben pushed himself to his feet, his body protesting with every movement. His mind was a whirl of options, but there was only one thing left to do. He had to protect the source, no matter the cost. He charged forward, weapon raised, and slammed into the nearest mercenary, knocking him off balance. But there was no time to celebrate. The mercenaries' comrades were closing in fast. Ben spun around, making eye contact with Mira. He couldn't do this alone. The cave trembled again, but this time it wasn't just the explosion. It was the mountain itself, reacting to the chaos. The source was in danger of being exposed, and the entire mountain might collapse if they didn't act fast. Ben lunged forward, slamming his spear into the side of the mercenary's chest. He had no choice but to fight for survival, for the future of the village, and for Mira. The light from the inner sanctum of the cave was like nothing Ben had ever seen. It was brighter than any star he'd ever encountered, radiating a pure otherworldly energy that made the air itself feel thick and electric. The mercenaries froze, their blasters raised but no longer aimed at the villagers. They watched, their faces a mix of awe and confusion, as the light pulsed in time with the strange, rumbling tremors that shook the cave. Ben's heart pounded in his chest. He knew instinctively that the source was waking up, and the mountain itself seemed to be reacting to it. The earth groaned, a low, rumbling sound that reverberated through his bones. He felt the tension building in the air, like the planet was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Mira, her face bruised and covered in blood, turned toward the light. Her expression hardened. She had seen this before, she knew what was coming. "The source," she whispered under her breath. "It's reacting to the violence. The balance is tipping. If it's not stopped, everything will fall apart." Ben glanced at her, his mind racing. What does that mean? What's going to happen? Mira's eyes flickered with something that almost looked like fear, though she quickly masked it. "The source is alive. It doesn't simply heal, it sustains the land. And when the balance is disturbed, it will consume everything around it, everything." Ben felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "Consume everything? You mean it'll destroy us all?" Mira nodded grimly. "If we don't stop it, yes." A sudden burst of energy erupted from the source, a shockwave of raw power that sent Ben stumbling back, his ears ringing from the force of it. The ground cracked beneath their feet, and the stone ceiling above them groaned ominously as if the mountain itself was being torn apart. The mercenaries, now visibly shaken, regained their composure. They had come for the source, but what they had just witnessed was far beyond their understanding. One of them, the leader, a tall, scarred man with cold eyes, barked orders to his team. "Fall back, get the rest of the explosives. We need to destroy this place now." Ben's heart sank as the mercenaries began to retreat, setting up more explosive charges to plant deeper in the cave. They had no intention of negotiating. They wanted to wipe out the source, along with everyone in their path. But Mira was already moving, her blade gleaming as she sprinted toward the inner sanctum. Ben hesitated for only a moment before following her. He had no plan, no clear strategy, but he couldn't let this happen. The villagers needed the source. If they lost it, everything they had fought for would be gone. The cave trembled again, but this time it felt different. The light was no longer pulsing. It was expanding, reaching out like a living thing, and Ben could feel it in the air. The power of the source was growing, and the mountain seemed to respond to its will. Ben's mind raced as he followed Mira deeper into the cavern. They passed through a series of narrow tunnels, their steps echoing off the walls, until they reached the heart of the cave, the source itself. The source was a pool of shimmering, glowing water, but it was unlike any water Ben had ever seen. It pulsed with an eerie, unnatural light as if it had a life of its own. The air around it hummed, the energy almost tangible, vibrating with power. Ben could feel the heat radiating from it, even though the cave was cold and damp. Mira stood at the edge of the pool, her eyes fixed on it, her face a mask of determination. "This is where it all began," she said quietly, her voice filled with a kind of reverence. "This is what gives us life, but it is also what will take it all away." Ben stepped forward, his hand instinctively reaching out, though he wasn't sure why. The energy in the air was intoxicating, almost overwhelming. He could feel the power of the source tugging at him, urging him to come closer, to drink from it again. But Mira stepped between him and the pool, blocking his path. "No," she said firmly. "You don't understand. This is not a gift. This is a debt, and if you don't stop it, it will consume everything. It will take the land, the people, everything." Ben's breath caught in his throat as he realized what she meant. The source wasn't just a wellspring of life. It was a force that demanded balance, a force that could destroy everything if that balance was tipped too far. Behind them, the mercenaries had reached the cavern's entrance, planting more explosives. They had figured out that the source was the key, and they were willing to sacrifice everything to get it. Ben could hear their voices echoing through the chamber, their weapons drawn, ready to finish what they had started. "Mira," Ben shouted, panic rising in his chest. "We have to stop them. We can't let them destroy it." Mira's eyes hardened. "We don't have a choice. We can't protect it anymore. The balance has already been broken. The source will not forgive us." Ben didn't understand. How could something that had given so much be so destructive? He looked at the pool again, the glowing water seeming to pulse more violently now. He knew there was a way to stop it. There had to be, but Mira's resolve was unwavering. "The only way to stop the source from destroying everything is to sever its link to the land," Mira said, her voice low. "And I am the only one who can do it." Ben's eyes widened as he realized what she was suggesting. "No, Mira, there must be another way." But Mira had already moved. Without another word, she stepped closer to the pool, her hand outstretched. The air hummed louder, the power of the source increasing as if it sensed her approach. Mira's eyes glowed softly, the same hue as the energy around her. "This is my debt," she whispered, "and now it's time to pay it." With a swift motion, she plunged her hand into the water. The light flared, blinding in its intensity, and Ben felt a wave of heat wash over him, as if the mountain itself was alive. The ground cracked again, and the entire cavern trembled violently. Ben's legs buckled beneath him, and he fell to his knees, his ears ringing from the explosion of power. "No," he shouted, scrambling toward Mira, but it was too late. She had already connected with the source, her body glowing with the same intense energy. The light began to fade, and as it did, the sound of the explosions outside grew louder, signaling the mercenaries' final push. Mira's body was still, her hand floating above the pool as if she were caught in some trance. Ben reached out for her, his heart racing, but the cave was collapsing around them. And then, in a whispering voice, barely audible over the roar of the chaos, Mira spoke. "It's done, the debt is paid." The world around Ben erupted in chaos. The ground beneath him trembled violently, sending rocks and debris cascading from the ceiling. The cave, once stable and serene, now seemed alive with the fury of the source's release. The light from the pool was now a blazing inferno, pulsating with untamed energy, a violent force threatening to tear the mountain apart. Ben's heart raced as the walls around him cracked and groaned, the sound of the mountain's collapse deafening. He crawled toward Mira, who was still standing motionless by the pool, her hands suspended above the shimmering water. Her blue skin glowed faintly, but it was clear that the energy was taking a toll on her. "Mira," Ben called, his voice raw with desperation as he reached out to grab her arm, pulling her away from the pool. She barely reacted, her eyes unfocused, her breathing shallow and labored. The power of the source seemed to have overwhelmed her, and Ben feared that she was slipping away. He managed to get her into his arms, holding her against his chest as the ground continued to shake beneath them. The cave was collapsing, but in the chaos, Ben could hear the distant sound of the mercenaries still moving through the tunnels. They were coming for the source. "We need to get out of here," Ben muttered, his voice a strained whisper. He tried to stand, but the tremors made it difficult to maintain his balance. With Mira's weight in his arms, it was even harder. "Ben," Mira's voice was faint, barely audible above the rumble of the collapsing cave. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she looked at him with recognition. "You must leave the source. I've sealed it." Ben shook his head, his hands trembling as he tried to support her. "No, you're not dying here. We can make it out. I'll get you help. I'm not leaving you." But Mira's face softened in resignation. She coughed weakly, her breath ragged. "It's too late for me. But the source is sealed. The balance will hold. You've helped me." Ben's throat tightened, and for the first time he realized just how much they had both sacrificed to get here. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for her, for everything she had given up for her people. "You've done more than anyone could ask of you," Ben whispered, his voice breaking. "I won't let it be for nothing." Mira's lips barely moved as she gave him one final, weak smile. "There's no more balance, but there's hope. You've shown them. There's another way, a way without the debt." Her body slumped against him, her grip loosening. Ben's breath caught in his throat as he realized she was slipping away. He pressed his hand to her chest, trying to steady her to keep her alive, but it was no use. The weight of the cave pressing in around them, the power of the source still crackling through the air, had taken its toll. "Mira, no." His voice cracked as he held her closer, but he could feel the warmth leaving her body. The pulse in her neck grew weaker, and the light in her eyes dimmed. The ground shook again, harder this time, a final warning as the mountain groaned in protest. The mercenaries were getting closer. Ben didn't know what to do. He had always been the healer, the one who fixed broken bones and healed wounds. But now there was no healing. There was only loss. With a final, soft exhale, Mira's body went still in his arms. The light that had once glowed in her eyes was gone, leaving only the cold emptiness of death. Ben closed his eyes, his chest tight with grief. He couldn't believe it, she was gone. For a moment, the chaos around him faded. All that was left was the weight of her death, the sacrifice she had made for her people, for the source, for the future. Ben's hands clenched into fists as he held her, his heart aching with the realization that he had failed her. But he couldn't afford to dwell on that now. There was still the matter of getting out, of saving the village. The mercenaries were still coming, and the mountain was collapsing faster than ever. If he didn't act, they would all be lost. He took one last look at Mira's face, committing it to memory. "I promise," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'll make sure your sacrifice wasn't in vain." With great effort, Ben stood, his legs wobbling beneath him as he carried her body through the crumbling tunnels. The walls around him were shaking violently, chunks of rock falling from above, but he pushed on. He had no choice. As he stumbled through the narrow passages, the distant sound of mercenaries' voices grew louder. They were getting closer, but Ben wasn't going to let them take the source. He didn't know what to do about the mercenaries, but one thing was clear. The source had been severed and its power was fading. The villagers would have to rebuild to learn to survive without it. He reached the main chamber where the remaining villagers had gathered, their faces pale with fear as they huddled together. Ben placed Mira's body on the cold stone floor, his hands shaking as he gently laid her down. The villagers stared at him, their eyes filled with confusion and uncertainty. "The source is gone," Ben said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. "We have to leave now before the mercenaries get here. The source. It won't save us anymore, but we can rebuild. There's still hope." The villagers looked at each other, some nodding, others unsure, but one thing was clear. Ben had become more than just a healer. He was their leader now, the one who had shown them that there was life after the debt, after the source. Ben's voice cracked as he addressed them one final time. "I'll help you, but we need to move quickly. Now is the time to choose. We can run or we can fight." The villagers hesitated, but then one by one they stood. The older warriors, the young children, the elders, all of them looked to Ben and then to Mira's lifeless body. The choice was made. The mountain was falling apart around them, but as Ben stood there, looking at the faces of those who had chosen to fight, a small flicker of hope sparked in his chest. They would survive, they would rebuild. And Mira's sacrifice would not be in vain. The sound of heavy boots echoed in the room as Captain Reeves stepped into the dimly lit control room, flanked by two of her most trusted soldiers. The door slammed shut behind her, sealing them in. The military had caught up with them, and there was nowhere left to run. Reeves' eyes locked onto Nathan, her cold gaze unwavering. "I should have known it would be you, Hayes. You think you can fix what's been broken. You think you can just walk in here and undo everything we've worked for." Nathan's heart raced as he continued to work on the control panel, his fingers moving in a blur of practiced motion. His breath came in short, quick bursts, but he didn't stop. They didn't have much time. The power grid was fluctuating and the radiation levels were climbing. Every moment spent here was a risk. "I'm not here to fix what you've built," Nathan said, his voice low but steady. "I'm here to stop you from killing everyone." Reeves stepped closer, her boots clanging on the steel floor. "You think I'm the one killing them?" Her laugh was bitter, laced with contempt. "You think you're the hero here? You and your little rebellion? You're just another cog in the machine, Hayes. You always have been." Sarah moved slightly to the side, positioning herself between Nathan and the soldiers. Her eyes were fixed on Reeves, her posture tense, but there was something else there, something burning beneath her usual cold demeanor. "I'm not part of your system anymore, Reeves," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. "And I'm not going to let you destroy what's left of us." The tension in the room was palpable. The only sound was the soft hum of the generators, the occasional beep from the console as Nathan worked furiously to rewire the system. His hands were shaking, but he couldn't stop now. The countdown was ticking. "You should have stayed in your place, Sarah," Reeves said, her tone mocking. "You're just a tool, just like Hayes. This is bigger than you, bigger than both of you. You're out of your depth." Nathan's fingers hovered over the final circuit, sweat beading on his forehead. "We're not out of our depth," he said, looking up at Reeves with defiance. "We're the ones who see the truth. You've been lying to everyone, manipulating them, but we're not going to let you use the dome to wipe out both sides." Sarah stepped forward, her voice sharp. "The dome was never meant to protect anyone. You and your kind built it to exterminate the exiles, to keep control. We're done letting you use us as pawns." Reeves took another step closer, her eyes narrowing. "You think you know everything, don't you? You don't even understand the sacrifices that were made to get us here. The lives lost, the people who believed in the cause. I did what had to be done." "But you didn't do it to save anyone," Nathan said, his voice steady. "You did it to maintain power, to crush anyone who threatened your control. You've been hiding the truth from everyone." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Nathan's hands were moving quickly now, bypassing the final layers of security and activating the system override. The emergency lights above flickered, casting long shadows across the room as the power grid reactivated. The hum of the machinery changed, growing louder as the main systems came back online. But it wasn't just the lights that flickered. A small section of the control panel blinked red. The radiation levels were dropping, but too slowly. Nathan's eyes darted to the readouts, panic rising in his chest. He had to do more. He had to. Suddenly, there was a loud crash. One of Reeves' soldiers fired a shot, and the bullet whizzed past Nathan's ear, narrowly missing him. The sound of the blast rang in his ears, and for a split second, everything slowed down. "Stay down," Sarah shouted, diving toward Nathan and pulling him behind a nearby column. The soldier aimed again, but before he could fire, Sarah's arm shot out, her weapon now in hand. She fired back, the crack of her gun sharp and deadly. Reeves cursed under her breath, waving her soldiers back. "Cover the exits," she barked. "We'll take them down." Nathan's heart was pounding, but his mind was still focused. His hands trembled as he continued to reroute the system, pressing buttons, shifting wires, doing whatever he could to force the radiation shields to stabilize. The dome's core had been malfunctioning for so long, but the damage had been done. It would take time to repair, and Nathan knew they couldn't keep the military at bay forever. "There's no way out of this, Hayes," Reeves spat, her voice a mix of anger and disbelief. "You've lost." Sarah's gaze flicked to Nathan, her expression hard. "We haven't lost yet." Nathan didn't take his eyes off the screen as he typed in a series of final commands, overriding the last layer of defense. A soft beep signaled the change, and he felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The system was stabilizing, but it wasn't enough. They needed more time. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice strained. "If I don't finish this in the next 5 minutes, everything will fail again." Reeves took another step forward, her eyes wild with fury. 5 minutes? You think you have 5 minutes?" She turned to her soldiers. "Get them now." The soldiers moved forward, but Sarah was already ahead of them. She fired again, the blast echoing off the walls as she took down the first soldier. Nathan's heart pounded as he quickly glanced at the control panel, his fingers moving rapidly across the keys. Every second felt like an eternity. Behind them, the sound of approaching drones reverberated down the hallway. Their mechanical whirs were getting closer, and Nathan's stomach twisted with dread. The drones were reactivating. His work was far from done. "Reeves," Sarah said, her voice colder than before. "You should leave now. We've done what you couldn't." Reeves snarled. "This isn't over, Hayes. I will make sure you pay for this." With one last look, she turned and signaled her soldiers to fall back. The sound of retreating footsteps echoed in the distance, and for a moment, Nathan and Sarah were left in silence. As the final readouts on the panel shifted to green, the system stabilized. The radiation levels dropped. The dome's shielding slowly began to recover. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Enough to give both humans and exiles a chance. Nathan exhaled slowly, his hands shaking with relief. He looked at Sarah, his chest heavy with exhaustion. "We did it," he said quietly. For a long moment, Sarah didn't respond. Then, without a word, she took the charred emblem from her armor and handed it to Nathan. "You hold on to this," she said softly, her voice no longer filled with anger or distrust, but something else, something that felt like acceptance. "When all of this is over, you give it back to her family. You'll be the one to fix this, not just the dome, but everything." Nathan stared at the emblem for a long time, the weight of it suddenly feeling heavier than he had ever imagined. He reached out and took it, feeling its cold, raw surface against his fingertips. His hands were still blistered, burned from the work he'd done, but he couldn't imagine a more fitting symbol for what they had just done, what they had survived. As they stepped into the hallway, the dawn began to break outside, the first rays of light filtering through the cracked walls. The city, so long in the shadow of the dome's failing shield, was finally beginning to heal. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Nathan felt the faintest spark of hope. They had survived together, and together they would rebuild. Outside, the world was waiting, uncertain but full of potential. The dome's radiation levels were stabilizing, but the real work, the real fight, was just beginning. And for the first time, Nathan knew there was a chance that both sides could find something worth fighting for. The cave was collapsing around them, the rumbling tremors growing stronger with every passing second. The air was thick with dust, and the walls groaned under the weight of the mountain. Ben's heart hammered in his chest as he led the villagers through the narrow, collapsing tunnels. There was no turning back now. The mercenaries were close, their footsteps echoing behind them as they made their way deeper into the mountain. But something had changed. The source, which had once given life at the cost of blood, was still alive. It wasn't gone, not completely. Its light, faint and flickering, had reappeared, almost as if it were calling them back. Ben's thoughts raced. The source had been severed, but it still pulsed with energy. The villagers had believed they were free of its curse, but now it seemed to have a different kind of power. What did this mean for them? What did it mean for him? "We have to move faster," Mira's father, the chieftain, called out. His voice was strained, but there was determination in his eyes. Despite the pain from his injuries, he was leading the way, helping the older villagers and children navigate through the collapsing tunnel. "We cannot linger. The mercenaries are close." Ben nodded, but his gaze kept shifting back to the faint glow of the source. It wasn't just light, it was energy, life. It was as if the mountain itself was trying to heal, to restore the balance that had been disturbed. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just running from the mercenaries. They were running from something bigger, something that still had the potential to destroy everything they had fought for. "Ben," Mira's voice echoed through the tunnel, weak but urgent. He turned to see her, still limp in his arms, her body cold and lifeless. He had carried her this far, but he knew that if they didn't escape soon, it would be too late. "We need to make a decision. If we keep running, we lose everything." Ben felt a chill run down his spine. He had no idea what the source truly was, but he knew that the villagers couldn't survive without it. If it was still alive, they needed to understand it. They needed to control it. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the choice he had to make. "I'm not running anymore," he said, his voice steady. "We're going back. The source isn't gone. We need to figure out how to use it, how to harness it without the debt." The villagers were silent for a moment, their faces a mix of disbelief and fear. They had lived by the source's laws for generations, sacrificing blood for healing, for life. Now Ben was asking them to walk away from everything they had ever known. The chieftain was the first to speak. His voice was low, but there was an edge to it. "You are asking us to defy our ancestors, to break the very law that has kept our people alive for centuries. How can you be sure it will work without the debt?" Ben took a deep breath, looking into the eyes of each of the villagers. "I can't promise it will work, but I believe there's another way. The source doesn't have to be about sacrifice. It doesn't have to take life to give it. We can learn from it, adapt it, and use it to heal without paying the price of blood." The chieftain's gaze softened slightly, but he remained silent. Mira's father had been a healer once, just like Ben, and he had paid the price for it. Now Ben was asking him to trust that healing could come without sacrifice. "There's no time to debate," Ben added, his voice hardening with resolve. "If we don't take control of this now, the mercenaries will destroy it and we'll be left with nothing." The chieftain nodded slowly. "Then we fight for it, but we do it together." Ben's eyes narrowed. He had never been a fighter, but he knew that survival meant more than just running. It meant fighting for what was right, for what they had worked for. The villagers had endured too much. Mira had given everything to protect them. He wasn't about to let that be in vain. The tunnel ahead of them began to widen as they moved further from the main collapse zone. Ben could hear the mercenaries' voices growing louder, closer. They were almost here. The villagers began to organize themselves, moving with purpose. Some were helping the elderly, others carried the children, while a few remained armed, ready to fight if needed. Ben, still carrying Mira's lifeless body, felt a deep surge of grief wash over him. She was gone, but her sacrifice was. Her vision of a world without the source's curse lived on in him. They reached the main cavern where the source had once rested. The cavern was now a broken ruin, the walls cracked and fractured. But in the center, the faint glow of the source remained, pulsing weakly. It was barely visible, but it was there, still alive, still beckoning. "We need to seal it," the chieftain said, his voice grim. "If it's still alive, it will destroy us all. It can't be allowed to reach its full power." Ben shook his head. "No, we're not sealing it. We're learning from it. We're using it for something better." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances, but there was a shift in the air. The source wasn't just a tool to them anymore. It was a symbol of their survival, their legacy, their future. They could no longer afford to live in the shadow of its power. They had to understand it, control it, and make it work for them, not against them. Ben stepped forward, his hand trembling as he reached out toward the source. The energy crackled in the air, sharp and intense, but it didn't push him away. Instead, it seemed to draw him in, almost like a magnetic force. As his fingers brushed the surface of the glowing water, a surge of energy ran through him, but it wasn't painful. It was understanding. The energy of the source flowed into him, and suddenly everything clicked. He saw the pattern, the way the source worked, not through sacrifice, but through balance. He had to act quickly. The mercenaries were nearly there, and there was no time for hesitation. Ben focused, channeling the energy of the source into the village's life force, amplifying it in a way that wouldn't demand blood in return. The ground beneath him hummed, the energy of the source shifting in response. It wasn't just about healing the body. It was about healing the land, about restoring balance without taking lives. He felt the pulse of the earth, the deep roots of the planet, and for the first time he understood. The mercenaries burst into the cavern, weapons raised, but they froze as the light from the source flared brighter than ever before. Ben didn't stop. The energy was flowing through him, and he had to make sure it worked, had to prove to the villagers that this was the way forward. The mercenaries stepped back, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. The energy in the cavern was unlike anything they had seen before. It was not destructive, but pure. It didn't demand a sacrifice, it gave freely. Ben held his ground, the power of the source swirling around him, and for the first time he felt in control. The mercenaries raised their weapons, but something in their expressions had changed. Fear had replaced their aggression. They didn't understand the power that was at play here, but they could feel it. One of the mercenaries, the leader, took a step back, his voice shaking. "What is this?" he demanded. "What have you done?" Ben turned to face him, his voice steady. "I've shown them a way forward, a way without the debt, without sacrifice." The cavern was filled with light, the energy of the source swirling around the villagers. It wasn't about fighting anymore. It was about surviving, about choosing a new path, a path of balance, not destruction. Conclusion: the mercenaries, stunned and unsure, backed away, their weapons lowered. The villagers stood, their faces a mix of awe and disbelief, as the energy of the source washed over them, not as a curse, but as a gift. Ben looked to the chieftain, who met his gaze with something new: hope. The source had been transformed. They had learned from it, adapted it, and made it their own. The debt had been paid, but it was no longer a price they had to bear. As the villagers began to rebuild, to find new ways of healing and thriving, Ben stood at the center of the cavern, looking out at the future he had helped create. There was still work to be done, but for the first time, he believed in the possibility of a better tomorrow. And in the distance, the first light of dawn broke through the mountain's shattered peak. A new day had begun.